I am delighted to welcome you to our webinar entitled Publish Your Book. Our speaker today is James Magner. James is a Connecticut endocrinologist and scientist who recently issued a second edition of his successful book of mystery stories titled Seeking Hidden Treasures, a collection of curious tales and essays. In 2011, he also published a book titled Chess Juggler. In 2015, he hybrid published a memoir, Free to Decide, Building a Life in Science and Medicine. He was a tenured professor of medicine and a vice president of clinical research and medical affairs at a pharmaceutical company. He loves chess and astronomy. He's an expert poker player who's performed at the World Series of Poker on ESPN. So that is certainly enough for me. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce our Renaissance man, our speaker for today, James Bagner. James, take it away.
Yeah, thank you, Sam. So I'm going to get this done in 45 minutes, and then we'll have time for questions. What I'm hoping is that you won't be too shy, and during that 15 minutes of questions at the end, if you have a question, you'll please say your name and your city at least, and then your quick question. I'm not sure we'll be able to get through all the questions in 15 minutes, and so on the very last slide is my email address, and over the next month or two, I'm happy to correspond by email with people who may be working on a manuscript or they may have other questions. I'm happy to exchange information with you. So I'm retired since 2016. So my main roles now are shown on the first line there. I'm a husband, that's my most important role. A father, I have 2 daughters, a grandfather. I'm a blood donor, so I want to put that plug in that the Red Cross really needs donations. And I volunteer at my church. Hobbies for fun. I like chess, movies, hiking, poker, and I like reading. And I worked till 2016, but I've been a chess player for 50 years. And so I did write up some of my chess games that I thought was fun to do. A niche publication for sure. And then I wrote a memoir of how I decided to become a physician and a scientist. Not too many physicians in the US work for pharmaceutical companies, so I wanted to explain that role to students, even students in medical school. So that's why I published that book. And then most importantly, I wanted to write fiction, and so that's what I'll be mentioning toward the end about my collection. It was pretty successful in 2019, so the publisher issued an expanded second edition. And Sam, if we could have the next slide. Sam's going to run the slides so I don't have to deal with the computer technology, and also she'll watch the waiting room to let stragglers in. I wanted to show this slide because covers are very important for books. They're important to get someone in the bookstore to pick up your book, or if they see it online to actually click on it and be interested. So the cover is very important. One thing that I didn't realize is that in traditional publishing, the publisher has 99% of say on what the cover is, because it's their money that's being invested and they want a cover that they think will sell. So they'll work with you, but they choose the cover. If you self-publish, you have a little more freedom in a hybrid publisher. Of course, if you do a vanity publishing, we'll talk about these 3 pathways later. You can make your cover anything you want, but the cover is very important. Next slide. My real life, and I'll be very quick. So you heard that I was an academician. After I trained at University of Chicago, after additional training, I returned to Chicago. So I worked at the old Michael Reese Hospital. I taught students. I did biochemical research. I'm a biochemist. And I took care of patients, endocrinology patients, mostly thyroid and diabetes. At the top right that's my molecule that I spent a lot of time characterizing, thyroid stimulating hormone, a pituitary hormone. Those of you with thyroid disease, you probably had a blood test for TSH measured. So that's my little hobby for decades that I worked on as a career. And the orange structure that you can sort of see behind the picture there, that's the receptor. I did get recruited to North Carolina, where I became a tenured professor, and then I worked at two pharmaceutical companies, Bayer and Genzyme. It turned out Genzyme was trying to manufacture the hormone TSH, put it in a bottle like you see there, and sell it for thyroid cancer patients. And so I was the perfect person to help them do that. Next slide. So this is my multiple choice quiz. Why should you write a book? Is it 1, to get rich, 2, to become famous, or 3, because you like to write and you have something interesting to say? So obviously, the answer is number 3. I can tell you right now, it's very unlikely you'll get rich or become famous writing a book. It doesn't have, as you can tell by my background and the kinds of things I've written about, the book, you should write about what you know and what you like, but it doesn't have to necessarily be about what you do for a living or your family or whatever. It doesn't need to be targeted for a huge audience. You do have to have the ability to commit time and some resources to make the project work. What do you mean, commit resources? So that's what we'll get into later. So I don't want people to go in unaware that if you undertake to actually try to spend time and write a book, somebody has to print it. Somebody has to distribute it. All of that costs money. And depending on your publishing pathway, you might have to put up some funds to make the project work. You also should write a book if you'd like to leave behind, after you check out, leave behind some thoughts for your family and friends, or if you have information that you think is entertaining or important. But keep in mind that you're an artist creating art, and you're doing this because you enjoy it. And you think it's worthwhile, even if nobody else agrees with you. You didn't know there was going to be homework, but I'd encourage you to do a couple of assignments, 3 assignments. The first one is to read Winston Churchill's Painting as a Pastime. It's free online at Project Gutenberg Canada, and it's only about 25 pages of text with some figures of his paintings. Even if you know nothing about painting and don't even care about painting, Winston Churchill, in this little book that takes about 90 minutes to read, is so entertaining. You know, he won the Nobel Prize in Literature in 1953, mostly for his historical works, but he is such a great writer. You'll love looking at his style. And then also the Autobiography of Benjamin Franklin, which Benjamin Franklin started as a young man. It was supposed to be for his son. He got interrupted because he was so busy. And then as an elderly man, he found his old manuscript and finished the second half of the book. And it's really short. You would think, oh my goodness, the Autobiography of Benjamin Franklin. It's a very slender book. You can read it in 3 days. Next slide. There have been a lot of books out in recent years. You see here on the x-axis, the year 1500 to around 2009, and just a huge explosion of books. This is for UK, Spain, and Germany. This is book titles published per 1 million inhabitants. So there's a lot of competition. If you, let's say, if you want to write a book and get it known and sold, there's a lot of people publishing books. Next slide. Turning to the US, there are about 1 million books published in the United States every year, and about half of those are self-published. Now, if there's 1 million books sold every year and half are self-published, if you do some arithmetic and look at the data, the average number of books sold per title over a 5-year period is about 225 books. So most people that publish a book don't sell tens of thousands of copies. So you're talking about, on average, selling 225 copies. So that's a shockingly low number. But it's probably because a lot of people who are publishing books, they have some poetry or something like that. That's for a niche audience, or like my little chess book was for a niche audience. So you're not necessarily trying to become a bestseller. You don't have to become a bestseller. In 2018, the United States main publishers sold more online than in stores, And if you think you're going to become rich as a writer, here's another interesting fact. In 2018, there were 45,200 professional authors or writers in the US, but only 21% of them earned all of their income from writing. So even if you're a professional, 80% of them don't make all their income from writing. People do read books though. So if you write a book, it's good. People will buy it and read it. In data from 2019 is that 72% of adults had read a book in the past year. That's any format, whether it be print or electronic. Print books are preferred. In 2017, some survey found that 47% of US readers had purchased up to 5 print books in the last 12 months. And so I put some other statistics on there. A little fact at the very bottom that I wish I had known when I started writing my collection of short stories. So you can learn from my mistakes, but I still, even if I knew this, I would have done it the same way. The last line there, traditional publishers want to sell novels, not short stories. And I'll explain why. Next slide. How do you start? And what is the time that's actually required if you're a busy person with a job and family? Well, with the basic notion of what you might want to try to write. So you have to decide fiction or nonfiction, the general topic. And the third point here is very important. What emotional or intellectual response or change do you want to induce in the reader? You really need to have that clearly in mind as you start writing or in the midst of your writing. Because if you don't know what you want to accomplish in your reader, you won't write an effective book. My mystery short stories are supposed to be thoughtful and entertaining. So that's the two things I was trying to achieve. And you simply need to begin. When Churchill decided to start painting as a hobby, he wrote this about it. This beginning with audacity, or being thrown into the middle of it, is already a very great part of the art. So that's very well stated. In my case, I started writing my chess book and then also my memoir for students when I was working. And I found that I needed at least 3 hours a week of uninterrupted time. You can't have a lot of interruptions. 3 hours a week uninterrupted time, and in order to begin writing. And while I was still employed full time, this meant about 1 evening per week. After I retired, I could take a half day or a day a week to write. And my first edition of my mystery book, 328 pages, took about 3 years to write it. And just a little bit at a time. Next slide. Here's the old saw that all the good English teachers will tell you. If you're writing fiction, you show, don't tell. So telling is he felt nervous and walked quickly out of the room. Showing is you say his face felt warm, the room seemed to swirl, the pretty girl smiled and continued to talk, but he couldn't hear a word. A knot was tightening in his stomach, blah, blah, blah. So in other words, you're not just saying he's nervous, but you're showing all these things that are happening, and the reader can conclude, put together, that he's nervous. Next slide. I want to emphasize the supreme importance you do something and then you correct the errors later. You're Michelangelo chipping away on a slab of marble. But if you're painting a painting, as Churchill says, or if you're writing a short story, you need to have a mental outline of the characters, the plot, and then try to write the piece, let's say in 1 day. Write it, and it'll be terrible, but that's the skeleton that you can later move things around and add flesh to what you're writing. Another tip for people that are not doing this very much is to, as you're writing out your skeleton, there may be a gunfight in the middle or whatever you're doing, a plane crash, something's happening that's in the middle. Well, cut and paste and make the most exciting scene to be the first page of your story. Then use a flashback to come back to it. And the reason that you need that opening to be important is if someone's in the bookstore and looking at books, if they read the first page and they're not excited about what they're reading, they'll pick a different book. So you do need to grab the reader in the first page or two to give them a reason to want to keep reading. Having established at the opening perilous or critical episode, then use the flashback and then set the characters and explain other nuances later. You need many cycles of revision to then change things. You can change character traits or dialogue. You can add or delete characters, shift details, add a villain or whatever you want to do. Mark Twain is said to have essentially completed his major works like Huckleberry Finn. They were essentially complete, but then he would sit on the top floor of his house here in Hartford, Connecticut, and work over that manuscript to be sure that every word was exactly the correct word. Next slide. Don't forget about point of view, and this is where beginners oftentimes mess up. Nearly all short stories and novels are written in the third person past tense. Sometimes it's first person past tense. Past tense is easier to use and maintain than present tense. So for example, see the little sentence I have in quotes there. I knocked the gun from his hand and I scampered down the stairs. That's first person past tense. But as you read, I knocked the gun from his hand and scampered down the stairs. It's past tense, but it seems like the action is happening now. So past tense has in English an immediacy, and it's a lot easier to use. Don't write a second person piece. And critical is that within each chapter or within each section of a story or novel, you need to keep the same person and tense. A mark of the beginner is a writer who isn't paying attention to that, and they keep shifting awkwardly between persons and tenses, and that irritates a knowledgeable reader. Now, if you have a chapter with 3 or 4 sections where the scene is changing, within a section, then you can change to a different person tense, but no changing within a section. Next slide. So having created a well-written story, it has a beginning, middle, and satisfying end, interesting characters, engaging plot, a clear sense of setting, then you need even more revision to embellish the language. You can choose better adjectives, you can add sentences to give more detail about the appearance of the person or the place. You change the words to adjust the tone. So considering the rhythm is sort of polishing the piece, the rhythm of a group of sentences. So you can enhance what's happening in the story by having short staccato sentences or longer sentences. And you can adjust words to make alliterations or rhymes. And I'd ask, this is your third and final assignment. Take a look at Lauren Eisley's book, The Immense Journey. It was very popular about 25, 30 years ago. She's a master of tone and rhythm. If you're very pressed for time, if you search for the essay title, The Bird and the Machine, there's a PDF online, free. You should read that and just note his just superb rhythm and tone in his work. Next slide. I have an anecdote about my lack of doing this. I'm a physician and scientist, so I like clear, straightforward writing, and my writing, even in my fiction, is clear and straightforward. Here's a very engaging sentence that I may have written in my career. The 1,032 patients were randomized equally into 2 groups, active drug versus placebo. So that really grabs you, right? No, it's subject, verb, object, and it's very clear. So that's the sort of writing I've done for decades in my job. But even my fiction now, I commonly use subject, verb, object structure. I do get a bit more creative in places, but my writing is clear. I never want to confuse the reader. And a lot of my puzzles and my mysteries are are intellectually challenging. The byword that I use for my writing is it's intelligent fiction for the scientifically inclined and quick-witted. So there may even be a little math in some of the fiction that I'm writing. So clarity. It's funny, in my most recent book, there was an editor that published a review in a Connecticut newspaper. He said, readers will find the going easy thanks to Magner's unembellished writing, and the stories reward readers with satisfying happy endings built up from tricky plots. So he even called my writing unembellished, and actually that's fine with me. But look at Lorne Eisley's work for a master of tone and rhythm. Next slide. I'm watching the time. We're doing okay. So now let's talk about some of the nuts and bolts of publishing. The different publishing pathways are primarily differentiated by the revenue models. There's traditional publishing, hybrid publishing, and sort of self or vanity presses. And if you look at the top line in each of those three sections, it's the revenue model that defines the publishing pathway. The traditional publisher gets money from revenue from book sales. The hybrid publisher gets two sources of revenue, revenue from book sales and also fee that the author pays to have his book published. Whereas a vanity press gets revenue from fees for services, but usually then disappears from the equation and gets no money from book sales. But although there's fewer and fewer of those pure vanity presses, it's blending into hybrid. What's important is that a traditional publisher, they get thousands of manuscripts, hundreds of thousands, that people are clamoring for them to look at because everybody would like a traditional publishing deal, but very few people can get it. You have to have a literary agent to get in the door. Whereas for a hybrid publisher, you don't. If you'd sign a deal with a traditional publisher, they'll pay you some upfront money. Let's say that you need to work on your book for 6 months, so you have to quit your job and work on your book. You know, that's not what I would recommend, but some people spend their life, 6 months actually being paid by the publisher, Henry Kissinger or somebody to write a book. And then the publisher takes the financial risk, pays the author in advance, pays for editorial changes, pays for printing, for distribution, for marketing, okay? But for paying for all that, the publisher owns and controls the work. They may not interfere too much with individual paragraphs or something like that, but they can decide to change the title. They can make the cover anything they want. They also can change content. They can say, we don't want so many Nazis in this story. We're going to take the Nazis out. The author may be very upset about that, but the publisher has purchased the content. And also they'll determine the time to market. They may say, well, we're a big company. We publish 11 novels a year that we have to market, and you're 15th on the list. And so we're not going to release your book this year. It'll be maybe 2 years from now. So the authors may not like that. Hybrid publisher, you have more control, but of course you don't get paid any money up front. In fact, you have to pay some fees because you can't hardly get a literary agent and you can't hardly get in the door to talk to a traditional publisher. For those of you thinking of writing a book, you're probably going to have to go with some sort of hybrid publishing scheme, which is why I said you're going to need a little bit of resource to put into this to make the project work. So you have to be aware that would be part of the deal. The author may get a higher or lower royalty than the traditional publisher, but is generally lower. And the author, though, owns the content. So you can keep your content exactly the way it is, and then you can use it also for other purposes. You continue to own it. The publisher may pay a little bit for printing and marketing and other services, depending on the deal, but you have to pay a fee to get the thing going, and then they'll take some revenue from the sales. Let's just go to the next slide. So if you're going to do hybrid publishing or non-traditional publishing. The problem for a novice is that there must be 50 companies out there that's willing to do this for you. I did a review online recently, in September, to see what the better reputations are for about the top 12 companies. So these are thought, at least by this author, to be the best 12 companies in green. Notice on the right in the box are the traditional publishers. There's 5 of them. And the problem is you need a literary agent to get in to talk to a traditional publisher. And if you write or try to contact literary agents, you're lost in a swarm of letters and emails that they're receiving. One literary agent who I met in New York told me that she gets 1,000 unsolicited emails daily from authors. So it's really hard to get the attention of a literary agent, but they might choose to work with an author if they have a well-written manuscript, a very unique voice, they have a focused audience that they can clearly define, and if they have a platform. By that, if somebody has 50,000 Twitter followers or something because of their job or something, then they have a platform that they could get some thousands of sales even in the first month. Next slide. So it's hard to evaluate which hybrid or self-publishing company you'd want to choose. So I would stick, I listed 12. That was what someone had said were the 12 best. Notice I actually didn't use any of those 12. I'm teaching you stuff that I didn't know when I started, okay? So I happened to pick a good company that's not one of the 12 best probably. It's called Archway. They're affiliated with Simon & Schuster, which is one of the big traditional publishers. And they're based in Indianapolis. I'm not strongly recommending them, but I'm just saying that it worked okay for me. Each company has multiple packages that offer fewer or more specific services with a price per package. It can run from $1,000 to $14,000, and then you can buy even more services. I mean, why would you buy more services? Well, in a hybrid publishing, they're going to do minimal marketing. If you want to do marketing, you didn't purchase that. So a traditional publisher like Simon & Schuster, they'll spend for marketing, but not necessarily a hybrid publisher won't pay for much, just what's in the contract. So if you want to take out some newspaper ads and a magazine ad or something, you would have to do that yourself. And after you've taken the trouble to write the book, don't you want to spend $1,000 to advertise it? So all of this adds up. If you're looking at different hybrid publishers, comparison shopping online is difficult. You can look at reviews of companies, but that can be difficult to assess. You should always just be very careful before signing any contract. You should and I'll tell you, I'll show you a list of what services you may think you might need. Your author royalties tend to be low, generally 10 or 20%. You generally pay by credit card up front for the basic fees. You can always add more later. And then you hope the company will work with you properly during the next year. So that's why you should only sign up with a reliable, legitimate company. And you probably shouldn't approach a company like this until your manuscript is essentially completed. Don't just write the first chapter and then start looking at these companies. They'll set, even in a hybrid publishing, they'll set the price of your book. Why? Because they're going to print it. And if it's a 100-page book, that's a different cost than a 300-page book. And they will work with you to determine the cover. A traditional publisher will tell you what the cover is going to be. Hybrid publisher will work with you about your choice of the cover. So I had a lot of choice in doing that. Next slide. I won't go through the details, but the company that I used, again, that I'm not necessarily recommending, they had, as you see across the top, different packages for just the basic services. I took the bookseller service, which was like $5,000, and I talked to them. I said, this seems like a lot. And as I talked to them a couple times, they actually dropped it $1,000 for me. Okay, so it was like maybe $4,000 to start. But then I bought a little editorial, line editing. I wanted for a particular reason I don't have time to explain. That was extra. And then I paid for some magazine ads and other ads that added some money. So and these are all the different services that I don't have time to talk about, but I'd be happy to exchange emails with you about what I thought about this and why I picked what I did. Next slide. Amazon is very important. You get a book page, and then you get an author page / author central. Your book page, and if you've used Amazon, you know what I'm talking about. The publisher usually will set that up for you. It has an image of your cover. It has a little blurb about the book. It may have reviews by readers, that sort of thing. It gives you different formats. You can choose an ebook or a paperback or a hardcover, and you can edit your book page after the hybrid publisher sets it up. You can get a password from Amazon, and then you can tweak it if you'd like. But it's nice to have the hybrid publisher set that up for you. Amazon will automatically post reviews by readers, good or bad. And then after your book is published, about a month later, the ebook will become available. And then you've probably seen this on an Amazon book page where there's a look inside feature for the Kindle. Amazon prefers the Kindle technology. There's different technologies. And people will be able to peek at about 20 pages as a sample. A surprise that I learned as I published my book, that there's another site called Google Play that without any permission or anything, they'll make about 60 pages of a book viewable on their system without any consultation with you. But that was okay with me. There's also an author page / author central. Customers can click on your name. That's a live link by the cover image of your book, and they can see your author page where you could put more text, photos, videos about your book or about you, whatever. If you're going to do book signings, like at a Barnes & Noble, you can put that information up there. You can link, if you've written a couple of books, link your books together. But not visible to a general customer, Author Central also has a tab that you can see your book sales that are always like a month or two out of date. Next slide. So now for 3 slides, and I'm watching my time, I'm going to give you a little more detail because as a practical communication technique, this is like a case history of what happened to me as I wrote my book, good and bad. So I'm a busy physician and vice president of a company. So I was pretty busy, but I was turning 65 in May of 2016. So I was thinking of retirement. And what really solidified my retirement plans for me was that I have 2 daughters, and I was about to have my first grandchild that was due on May 22nd of 2016. So I talked to my wife and I turned in my paperwork, and I retired from my company on May 2nd, 2016. With the idea that then my wife and I would go to California and spend a lot of time with our first grandchild and the family out there. So that's what we did. I mean, life is short, you make your choices. But I can't just change diapers all the time. So also during the summer of 2016, I began writing during an afternoon here and there, my first short mystery stories. I'd always wanted to write some mystery stories because when I was a kid, I'd watched Alfred Hitchcock Presents, the old black and white TV program. I sat with my mom, a lot of good memories of that. And so I wrote my first short mystery stories, and I submitted them to magazines, and nobody took them. I didn't realize at that time that there were thousands of people trying to publish stories, so I had no idea. I'd published about 70 scientific papers, which also can be difficult to publish, but I was doing, I thought, important work in science, and I got my papers published, but I was surprised by the rejections. So by mid 16 and then in early 2017, the rejection letters were piling up, but I was retired and I had a busy family things going on, but I wrote more stories. I also, by the way, started doing more volunteer work. I volunteer at Yale Hospital, which is not too far from me. I volunteer at my church. I've become a board member of a newspaper in our area, a small newspaper. So in other words, I'm doing other things, but I had time to write stories. So my stories were rejected, but I wrote more stories. Then finally, in November of 2017, I had a mystery story, but it had a light romance in it called The Message, and it won second place in the United States in a love and romance contest, which absolutely floored my wife, because then her nerdy scientific husband was actually an award-winning, nationally known love and romance author. I think that that even surprised me. And then actually another story called Crazy Aunt Ruth's Legacy was also chosen by a company as one of 10 stories to put in an anthology. So I had 2 successes out of about 10 stories that I had sent to maybe 5 magazines each. By mid 2018, I had more rejections, so I decided to bundle, I'm watching my time, bundle 12 of my stories and 5 essays together into a book with the theme of hidden treasures, because it seemed like I was writing mystery stories and a lot of them had to do with finding buried gold, finding silver, searching Crazy Aunt Ruth's house after her untimely death at age 92, to search for her cash that she had hidden somewhere in her house. So those are the sorts of, it seemed like that's what I was writing. So if I'm going to put these together as a book, the common thread was it was looking for hidden treasures. After a galley signed up with a company, they made a first galley proof, which wasn't the final galley, but it was a galley. So I sent that to Kirkus Review, which for like $700, they will do an objective review. It could be good or bad. It's usually librarians or publishing professionals who, for a Saturday, 1 day a week, they make money on the side by writing reviews. You don't have any input into what they're going to write, but you want an objective external review to go on the back cover of your book. I wrote to literary agents online, but I didn't have a response about my, I wanted a traditional publishing package. And now I know they were getting 1,000 unsolicited emails per day. I found that, that's why I didn't get a response, but I didn't know that until December 2018. And that you could do the same thing. You pay a fee, which in this case was $800 plus hotel and travel. I took the train into New York City, which is only 75 miles away from me. And I went to what's called a pitch conference, where you can tell publishing professionals in New York about your project. So they thought my writing was really good, but they told me, unfortunately, we want novels, not short stories. And after they've learned that I was an amateur poker player, they said, well, you should write a poker mystery and it should be 90,000 words. And if there's a romance in it, it should have a bedroom scene. Well, that was surprising because my light romances that I was writing as part of my mysteries, none of them had a bedroom scene. But apparently that's what their marketing departments wanted. They were looking for, it doesn't have to be horrendously graphic, but it needs to have a bedroom scene. So I came home and talked to my boss. Now, you know who my boss is, but my wife thought it was pretty funny. And she worried what our friends might think about that. But I was able to work out a humorous and very sweet bedroom scene that my wife approved that I put in the book. She actually loved it. So it worked out well. And of course, I met maybe 20 authors that were attending this conference. But it's a way you can go to various writers' conferences and get contact with some agents at least. Okay, next slide. I need to speed up here. So they had told me to write a poker novel. I've won a lot of money playing poker. You know, I've always been very good at math, and I like competitive games. And so I studied poker, and then I surprised myself. I've actually done very well as an amateur poker player. So the people at this New York conference were fascinated by that. So I wrote my little poker novella. It's 46,000 words. I put it with my short stories. I talked to this Archway company, and I bought about $6,700 worth of services. The discounted bookseller package, I bought some editing and some other stuff, and I get 10%, which actually I was happy because remember, I'm an artist making art. So I wouldn't do this if I was 19, but if I'm 69, I think that's fine. I had an English professor at a Connecticut university. He was willing to look at my manuscript for no charge and write a paragraph about the book that I put by the title page of the published book. So in August 2019, I published my book and it appeared on Amazon. The ebook, as I'd mentioned, comes out about a month later. So it launched in September. I paid a fee, a small fee, that allowed the publisher to lower the ebook price from the regular $4.99 to 99 cents as a special for 60 days. And I did that for a reason I'll explain in a minute. And I posted about it on LinkedIn, Facebook, and the publisher helped me start a book website, which I think is modestly useful. In autumn of 2019, I actually spent then a little more money. You don't have to spend all this money, but I chose to spend a little more money for advertising. And then the reason I wanted my book to cost 99 cents is that in the fall, the book was published in August, and in October, I was going to go to my 50th high school reunion. So I wanted to tell all my old friends and classmates about my book, but I didn't want to be like trying to sell them a $20 book. I thought it would not be too embarrassing to tell them that I've written this book and it's really interesting and it's 99 cents. So I didn't feel guilty about sort of talking to them at the wine and cheese reception about that. And a lot of them, they would stand right there with their phone and they would buy it in 1 minute. They say, sure, I'll buy your book for 99 cents. I also, as the book was out, I had more ideas for more short stories and I submitted those to more magazines. They were all rejected. I did have a talk to the local Barnes and Noble, and they said, sure, we'll have you come in for one evening. Actually, it was 2 evenings, but we get a 30% price off for any books of your books we sell. And so their profit was guaranteed. So I sat at a table and I did card tricks. Since I know 2 really good card tricks, and that was you need something like that, because if you're sitting at a table, I was able to, as people would walk by, I'd say, you want to see a 1-minute card trick? And I'd be shuffling the cards, and almost everybody stopped and said, sure, I'll see a 1-minute card trick. And then a lot of those people bought the book. It was like $20 book, paperback. So that was successful. Next slide. I also spent a little money in 2020 to have a publicist help me more with social media, because I'm not that great with social media. And after all the money I spent and the effort I did, by May of 2020, so it's less than a year, I'd sold 186 books, maybe a few more, because some sellers, it was being sold in Europe and so on also, so I don't have data. But see, the average book sells 225 in 5 years. So I was way ahead of the game. And the publisher said, well, if you'll pay us $3,000, you can make an expanded second edition and put all your new stories in. So I decided to do that because I thought this project was fun. So I made my new expanded edition, 390 pages, that came out in August 2020, and it's been very successful. This book has really the new edition. I guess I earned a little reputation with the first book, and this book, just in in recent weeks, it's really been selling well. So, but my goal is not just to sell books to make money. I would like to share my ideas. Okay, next slide. I think I need to wrap up in a minute, and then we'll have questions. You can, in terms of promotion, you can have low-cost promotions like social media, talk to your neighbors and classmates, book signings, or you can pay for promotions like book fairs, writers' conferences, like I've explained what that is. There are other sorts of conferences, book contests. I wouldn't spend a lot of money on all this, but those are options. Next slide. And this is my last slide, and then we'll open up for questions. Writing a book is not for everyone, but as a U of C person, and you know what that means, I've always been a person that likes to read and write, and this was something that I wanted to get into as a hobby in my retirement, basically. Remember that you are an artist and not a salesman or a profit-hungry tycoon. You're going to need to spend a little money, but you don't need to spend a lot of money. And you are choosing to create an artistic product because you enjoy making it and you feel that you have something of value to contribute. So good luck. And I put my email address on there, and over the next couple months, I'm happy to exchange emails with people. So let's have questions.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, James. This is a fascinating topic to learn a little bit more about. We clearly have some great experience. So I just dropped this in a chat, and this is a little different from the typical webinar that we do. You all are actually a part of this meeting. You are live and can jump on camera. So I encourage, if you have any questions, to click on the participants button and then click raise hand. I'll see that, and then I'll be able to call on you. We'll moderate our Q&A that way, and we'll have you come on screen and ask your question. But I do see already that we've got a question in the chat, so we'll just start with that one. Can you tell us, James, about the 2019 book fair? Was that useful, and how did that work?
Yeah, I paid a fee to my publisher, Archway, and what they did is they said you have to pay your own flight and hotel to go to Miami, but we will provide a booth and 75 paperback copies of your book for the fee that you're paying. And the Miami Book Fair, it's a multi-day event on the streets of Miami, a nice neighborhood. There were palm trees, and it's sort of a small college campus there. It has, I've forgotten the name of the college. It's like a community college. So they had multiple buildings, auditoriums for presentations by different authors. So, and it was nice weather in November 2019. And the Archway Company had a booth along one of the sidewalks. You know, it's a book fair in the streets of the city, where there were 3 or 4 authors at a time. Each guy had his little space and a pile of books, and the books were given away free. 75 books as people would come by, because I had paid a discounted price for the books. That's the way it worked. But the idea was to increase the visibility of your book. You would talk to people about your book, and then you would give them an autographed copy of your book. Of course, then they may want to buy additional copies, you know, to give as gifts or whatever. So I met a lot of authors, and also it was fun because you got a shopping bag, and all these different booths, people were giving away their books free, all over the place, all different kinds of books. And of course, you just got one free book from each vendor if you wanted. And of course, your shopping bag, you had to be careful. Don't just go in and get 100 books, you can't even carry it. So I got a couple finance books and some history books and so on that I like to see. So that was fun. And I think that increased the visibility of my book.
Sounds like a bibliophile's dream.
Yeah.
We have a question from Larry here. Go right ahead, Larry. Share your name and what city you're tuning in from, and then your question.
You might be muted.
It looks like you're muted. Yep.
I'm Larry Ross. I'm in Washington, D.C.
Yep.
And I'm wondering where the university presses fit among the publishers.
Yeah, what I've heard, now I'm not an expert on this, but they actually are more like a vanity press. I was surprised to hear that because university press, that sounds like it's very official and very special. I think what it is that for faculty of the university who want to publish, and then maybe other prominent scientists or business people, whatever, want to publish, they talk to the press and they work out a business deal. And I don't know anything about the finances. I've laid my cards on the table, so to speak, as a poker player. I've told you kind of the financial arrangements. I don't really know how a university press works, but it's not like a traditional publisher.
Does it give you any more prestige than?
I think it does. I think it does to be associated with the university. I didn't actually look into that because I didn't think that I would really qualify. I was at a private pharmaceutical company, and there was no reason why a university would work with me. I think that if you're a faculty member at a university, you can talk to them, and maybe they would be willing to work with some of their faculty or recent faculty. You'll just have to look into it. That I can't really say too much more about that.
Thank you.
We have a question in the chat from Ginger. How long did it take you to break even, if at all, from the money that you wrote, that you spent on publishing?
I haven't broken even. Remember, my royalties are 10%. I do expect that I'll, depending on how long I live, I will break even eventually. So I've spent, I'm sure I've spent $10,000. Maybe 11,000. I mean, I don't know exactly. If you have to count pennies, this is probably not the hobby for you, just like poker. You go to Las Vegas, you have a pocket full of $100 bills, like $1,000. And if you're going to Las Vegas to play poker, you're going to spend some money. So if this is what you want to do, I wanted to make sure that people understood you're not going to be able to get a traditional publishing package. That's very unlikely unless you're, your name is Hunter Biden or Donald Trump or something like that. In other words, if there's some reason why there would be a lot of attention to your book, then you can get a package. But if you're, an educated but ordinary citizen, you're going to have to use hybrid publishing, which is why I put like 25% of my time talking to you about hybrid publishing. And I don't want to scare people away. Just think of people pay money to join a country club, to have a boat, to play golf, whatever other hobbies you have. And if you would like to leave as a legacy for your family and friends and your intellectual contribution, if you'd like to leave a book of mystery stories, and it's going to cost you $10,000 to leave that legacy, I don't actually think that's too much to pay for me. That's my opinion. Other people may say, well, I'll only spend $5,000. Well, you can do that. You can spend as much as you want, but you are going to need to spend a couple thousand at least to get the process going.
Helpful to stay realistic here as we're moving through the process. Yeah. Steve, you're up.
Yeah, James, it's Steve Barnard from Chicago. I'm curious. So, is there a way to ladder up to the elusive literary agents via the self-publishing process?
I suppose. I was hoping that because I've won a lot of money at poker, I put on the title of my book includes novella Bamboozle, a poker mystery. So I put that on my title. And I was hoping that if I would have some more big wins in Las Vegas, that then I could talk to an agent and say, look, I'm already actually internationally known as a poker player, but I'm not, I've been on TV once, so I'm not, a superstar. If I would actually have, so in other words, if you do something that's sort of really unusual, that gets your name in the news, not just playing poker, but depending on what your business is or what you're doing in your real life, it's possible that an agent could be attracted to that. And you can break through, but you'll never break through by sending them an email. So the way to break through is to pay like $500 or $800 to go to a writer's conference for a couple of days, hopefully near your home, so you don't have to pay for travel. And then you'll be able to interact with agents, and they'll meet you personally.
Wonderful. I think I saw Doreen, you had your hand raised for a second. Do you have a question for James?
Oh yeah, I did, but I saw we were short on time, so I can always follow up with James.
Please go right ahead. We've got time for one more.
Okay, well, it follows up, hey James, it follows up from your last comment just now regarding traditional publishers. So it's twofold, but one was the quality of traditional publishers that you met in these alternate forums where you pay to attend. Are these the juniors, fresh, undergrads coming to represent the company? And is there realistically any traction from that? And then the follow on to that, just based on my experience in another publication where I secured copyrights in advance. And so you indicated with a traditional publisher, the title, et cetera, is theirs, right? But, again, sharing with you that in my experience, securing a copyright, I'm not sure if you have any other experience with that, either through others or in terms of that ownership.
Yeah, so a couple questions there. So when I went to New York, I went to New York for that writers conference because it was near my home, a 2-hour train ride. So that cost me $20 or so each way to go to New York. So that was pretty cheap. But then the hotel for a couple of nights was expensive. I met 6 industry professionals there over a couple of days. One man was an older man who had many years of experience, and here's the guy who said, "We never buy short stories. Nobody will buy collections of short stories. We want novels." And then the idea is you would have a follow-up novel to start a series of novels with the same characters, so they can hook readers and sell them. But there were also middle-aged people. Some of these people were middle, and a couple of them were younger. So it was a range of ages at this particular conference, and they were all very helpful. And they were not trying to be depressing or negative. They were trying to offer good advice. And I followed their advice. I put a bedroom scene in my book, which was very different for me, but it was a growth experience, right? And people love it. And then I also wrote a poker novella, which I wouldn't have written, so I acted on the advice they gave me. In terms of copyright, after you turn in your manuscript to the hybrid publisher, they submitted the final manuscript to a company that keeps that on file and issues you a certificate that on such a date, Dr. James Magner submitted this manuscript to our bank of manuscripts. And so if you would ever have a legal problem of somebody copying your work, you have it registered with this company. But I didn't set that up. My hybrid publisher set that up. Okay, next question.
I think that is all we have time for today, James. Thank you so much for sharing your tips.
It was my pleasure.